Merry Christmas, everyone. This is a message about Christmas, and it's written by a mystery writer. So, without Googling, can you guess who wrote it? Our mystery writer starts with a quote from John's Gospel. And the Word was made flesh and came to dwell among us. And we had sight of his glory, glory such as belongs to the Father's only begotten Son, full of grace and truth. That's John 1, verse 14. Bethlehem became the link between heaven and earth. God and man met here and looked each other in the face. In the taking of human flesh, the Father prepared it, the Spirit formed it, and the Son assumed it. He who had an eternal generation in the bosom of the Father now had a temporal generation in time. He who had his birth in Bethlehem came to be born in the hearts of men. For what would it profit if he was born 1,000 times in Bethlehem unless he was born again in man? Now, man need not hide from God, as Adam did, for he can be seen through Christ's human nature. Christ did not gain one perfection more by becoming man, nor did he lose anything of what he possessed as God. There was the almightiness of God in the movement of his arm, the infinite love of God in the beatings of his human heart, and the unmeasured compassion of God to sinners in his eyes. God is now manifest in the flesh. This is what is called the incarnation. The whole range of the divine attributes of power and goodness, justice, love, beauty were in him. And when our divine Lord acted and spoke, God in his perfect nature became manifest to those who saw him and heard him and touched him. As he told Philip later on, "Whoever has seen me has seen the Father." John 14, verse 9. No man can love anything unless he can get his arms around it. And the cosmos is too big and too bulky. But once God became a babe and was wrapped in swaddling clothes and laid in a manger, men could say, "This is Emmanuel. This is God with us." By his reaching down to frail human nature and lifting it up to the incomparable prerogative of union with himself, human nature became dignified. So real was this union that all of his acts and words, all of his agonies and tears, all of his thoughts and reasonings, resolves and emotions, while being properly human, were at the same time the acts and words, agonies and tears, thoughts and reasonings, resolves and emotions of the eternal Son of God. What men call the incarnation is but the union of two natures, the divine and the human, in a single person who governs both. This is not difficult to understand, for what is man but a sample at an immeasurably low level of the union of two totally different substances, one material and the other immaterial, one the body, the other the soul, under the regency of a single human personality. What is more remote from one another than powers and capacities of flesh and spirit? Antecedent to their unity, how difficult it would be ever to conceive of a moment when body and soul would be united in a single personality. That they are so united is an experience clear to every mortal. And yet, it is an experience at which man does not marvel because of its familiarity. God, who brings together body and soul into one human personality, notwithstanding their difference in nature, could surely bring about the union of a human body and a human soul with his divinity under the control of the eternal person, his own person. This is what is meant by the, quote, "and the Word was made flesh and came to dwell among us," unquote, John 1, verse 14. The divine person, which assumed human nature, was not created, as is the case of all other persons. His person was the pre-existent Word, or Logos. His human nature, on the one hand, was derived from the miraculous conception by Mary, in which the divine overshadowing of the Spirit and the human fiat, or the consent of a woman, were most beautifully blended. This is the beginning of a new humanity, out of the material of the fallen race. When the Word became flesh, it did not mean that any change took place in the divine Word. The Word of God proceeding forth did not leave the Father's side. What happened was not so much the conversion of the Godhead into flesh as the taking of a manhood into God. There was continuity with the fallen race of man through the manhood taken from Mary. There is discontinuity through the fact that the person of Christ is the pre-existent Logos. Christ thus literally becomes the second Adam, the man through whom all the human race starts all over. His teaching centered on the incorporation of human natures to him, after the manner in which the human nature that he took from Mary was united to the eternal Word. It's hard for a human being to understand the humility that was involved in the Word becoming flesh. Imagine, if it were possible, a human person divesting himself of his body and then sending his soul into the body of a serpent. A double humiliation would follow. First, accepting the limitations of a serpentine organism, knowing all the while that his mind was superior and that fangs could not adequately articulate thoughts no serpent ever possessed. The second humiliation would be to be forced, as a result of this emptying of self, to live in the companionship of serpents. But all this is nothing compared to the emptying of God, by which he took on the form of man and accepted the limitations of humanity, such as hunger and persecution. Not trivial either was it for the wisdom of God to condemn himself to association with poor fishermen who knew so little. But this humiliation, which began in Bethlehem when he was conceived in the Virgin Mary, was only the first of many to counteract the pride of man, until the final humiliation of death on the cross. If there was no cross, there would have been no crib. If there had been no nails, there would have been no straw. But he could not teach the lesson of the cross as payment for sin. He had to take it. God the Father did not spare his Son, so much did he love mankind. That was the secret, wrapped in the swaddling bands. The name Jesus was a fairly common one among the Jews. In the original Hebrew, it was Josue. The angel told Joseph that Mary would, quote, bear a son, whom thou shalt call Jesus, for he is to save his people from their sins, unquote. Matthew 1:21. The first indication of the nature of his mission on earth does not mention his teaching, for the teaching would be ineffective unless there was first salvation. He was given another name at the same time, the name Emmanuel. Behold, the virgin shall be with child, and shall bear a son, and they shall call him Emmanuel, which means God with us, Matthew 1:23. Can you guess who wrote these words? This is the honor system, but don't Google anything. I'll give you a major hint. The writer is a Christian. Leave your guess in the comment box below. Subscribe to this channel, stay in touch, and leave a comment in addition to your guess on who wrote those words. And if you live in the intersection between faith and culture and you want to know more, you want to grow in your ability to engage the culture, consider joining Coffin Nation, now with members in over 20 countries who realize that no one's going to take back the culture unless, by God's grace, we do. A merry and blessed and peaceful Christmas to you. Be a saint. What else is there?